Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast, where we look at marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. Hi, I am your host, Izzy House, and this year we will be meeting space industry professionals that focus on promoting their companies and space. In this episode, we will meet the space marketing professional on the agency side, Daniel Smith from AstroAgency. So lift off in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast. Information relating to our discussion today and links to the video version can be found in the episode show notes on spacemarketingpodcast.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. It will help more people reach beyond the atmosphere. Information in this episode is for entertainment and information only. Please consult a professional for your specific situation. In this episode of the Space Marketing Podcast, we will continue to chat with marketing professionals on the agency side. Today, we will meet Daniel Smith with AstroAgency from Edinburgh, Scotland in the UK. The UK is becoming a leader in the space industry. While most countries are looking at establishing one spaceport, the UK is building 7. They are serious about space, and they are leading the way with eco-friendly facilities and launch methods. Daniel Smith with AstroAgency is raising his voice to help the UK and the world tell their story about space. He discusses his passion for showcasing the benefits of commercial space to life on Earth as a columnist in newspapers, as a space commentator on CNN and BBC, and as well as on the stage at events like the UN World Space Forum in Vienna. So welcome to the podcast, Daniel.
Hi, Izzy. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I love the journey of space, and UK is doing some wonderful things. And I actually lived there for a little bit.
Perfect.
Anyway, so let's talk about you. And what was your journey to space? How did you pick space? I mean, it's only been recently that the UK has really gotten kind of excited about it. And so tell us your journey to get here.
Sure. I think, for the commercial space sector, it is fairly new in the UK. Absolutely, that's the case. There's some, deep space mission heritage and things in the past, but the commercial sector is still quite formative. So it's a really exciting time to be involved in it, and that's part of why I'm here, I guess. But I think maybe there'll be a theme throughout this discussion. I don't know, but I think it's important that people from other sides of not just space but other industries and other walks of life that are attracted to the space sector. And I think that I'm maybe an example of that, because and this might not win me any prizes with the audience, but I didn't grow up fascinated by space beyond the obvious fascination we all have, of course, when we look up, but it wasn't that I was focused on sci-fi films or books or things. I was very much into sport and movies and music. Just space never really was something that I ever considered. I mean, maybe that was part of growing up in a council estate in Scotland. You don't really imagine it as a career or anything like that. So I guess for me, it was more the commercial opportunity in space, and it kind of, I guess it was almost like the space picked me rather than me picking space. And that was thanks to someone. When the first company I was involved with, I set up a company called Skyrora for the owner, Vladimir, who was living out in the States at the time. And he had really spotted this opportunity around developing the first vertical orbital launch vehicle for the UK as part of, you mentioned, spaceport development in the UK and the number of spaceports that are under development. So he could see that what was missing here was a launch vehicle. So he had that vision. So when I'd worked with him in the past, I was also involved in the IT industry and social gaming apps and things like that. And I'd kind of worked all over the world, Philippines and Ukraine and Gibraltar. And he had remembered me from when we'd worked in the past on other things, and he'd asked if I'd moved back to the UK and I would set this launch vehicle company up for him, which at first I thought, what, this is very new. And it wasn't until I started to research it that I realized the opportunity. But the beauty of that is that when you're setting up a launch company, you really get to know the full sector very quickly. You get to see where the gaps are, whether that be supply chain, and obviously in the UK, it's not like the US where it's such a mature upstream sector. It was still pretty formative. This was like 2016, 2017. So you see the supply chain gaps and you see the skills gaps. I was trying to bring in engineers that had any experience in launch. And so to try and find the right people to drive that forward, we were thinking about regulations at the time. The Space Industry Act hadn't been passed in the UK. So we were thinking, how do we feed in what might be needed in regulations, and how do we get that point across to the regulators? The spaceports, engaging with the different spaceports, the customers, the satellite companies, trying to understand who we could work with and indeed what they're doing with their satellites. And then that opened up the whole information on space data. So it was a great start for me in the industry. And, I've gone on, there's 5 space companies I've helped to found now, or founded. And it's, I never could have imagined it, but it's hard to see myself anywhere else at this point, I must say.
I'd like to kind of piggyback on that about the different types of professionals, like for myself included. Who'd have thought marketing would be something that we do for space? And yet here we are. The industry needs all kinds of different disciplines, not just engineers. I mean, there's a desperate need for engineers.
Sure.
They need other professionals as well. Let's go on the marketing side and tell us about your business, which is AstroAgency.
Yeah, so AstroAgency kind of came out of that experience. So I'd been involved in setting up 2 launch focused companies. One was a launch brokerage firm, and obviously I mentioned Scarora with Vladimir and the team. And I could just see that these gaps were out there, and particularly around supply chain, and also there was a perception issue in the industry too. I felt that when you talk to people, particularly again in the UK and particularly in Scotland, where I'm based, it was just interesting to see how people reacted when you talked about the space sector and the importance of the space sector on our everyday lives. And so more and more I had this idea in my head that, I was a big fan of the TV show Mad Men, which I'm sure you've seen. And I must have been watching it around that time as well. And I thought, space needs an ad agency. It needs a Mad Men to get the word out more and to help connect it better. And so that was it, really. It was about trying to highlight particularly to companies that aren't involved in the space sector at the moment, how they can be part of the upstream supply chain. So how they can create a new revenue stream for their business by supporting launch companies or spaceports or satellite companies or whatever it might be, but also trying to get the word out to businesses and governments around the benefits of space data. So why are we launching satellites in the first place? And trying to really raise awareness in the opportunities and the fact that when it comes to space data, the benefits it can bring, I feel, are really limited only by your imagination. So I just felt none of that was getting out there, and there was a real focus on kind of astronauts and deep space missions, etc., Mars and things. And I thought, if we're going to boost the commercial space sector, we need to be telling the story better. So that was a kind of it's where it all started for AstroAgency.
Not only do we have this lack of knowledge to the public, but there's a lack of awareness of how it is in their life. I mean, how many people carry a cell phone in their pocket, yet they don't realize that, the coatings in the camera came from space adventures, and the satellite data itself, the maps, the communication, even the downloading of anything, it's all satellite driven. But yet
Absolutely.
they don't think of space. So there's a very big disconnect right now with the public in how space affects their life. It's just forgotten. So that is one of the jobs that we have, is to bring it to their awareness and make sure that they do know that space is critical for them.
Absolutely, and I think it's a global issue that as well, Izzy. That's something that's
Yes.
not just in the UK or in Europe or the US. It's something everywhere, and it's why the Astro Agency was set up to be global, because we realised that there's an opportunity to tell that story and raise awareness everywhere. And we have people, dotted around, around 20 staff dotted around all over the world, and looking at new offices now, looking at US office, which is really exciting for the year ahead. And we work with around 52 commercial space companies. So some big names: Euroconsult, Spire Global, ClearSpace. But we also work with 7 government agencies around different countries around the world to support them on getting those messages out. So yeah, it's been a really exciting journey the last 4 years, I have to say.
Yes, space definitely needs marketing professionals for sure.
Yeah.
You said you set up 5 companies. And another one of your companies is actually one that I'm very excited about as well, and that's Fire Arrow. Can you tell us a little bit about Fire Arrow and what it does?
Definitely, yeah, I'd be delighted to. So very different from AstroAgency. This is a company that is really leveraging the team's knowledge on developing spaceports from the UK, both horizontal and vertical spaceports, and essentially trying to export that knowledge. So we can see, and you know, you just need to look at Euroconsult report to see that there's more than 90 countries around the world that are involved in carrying out some kind of space activity. And there's a lot of countries now that are also looking at developing their own launch capability, sovereign launch capability, if you want to call it that, so they can have their own control, their own access to space for their own satellite and space infrastructure. And so the idea with Fire Arrow is, well, let's help other countries around the world to do that. Let's help them to build their spaceport, design and build their spaceports. And the team at Fire Arrow and the associates at Fire Arrow, it's a really interesting wide network that have all worked together on these projects in the UK, and they're basically trying to drive down the cost. So look at this new space approach, if you will, around launch, which is quite unique. It's quite an interesting proposition. We're having some great conversations. So I'll be out in Asia next week, in the Middle East recently too, and Australia. I think they've got 5 spaceports under development. So there's lots of countries around the world looking at this. So Fire Arrow that's why they've been established, to try and to fill that gap using the knowledge that they've got. So I'm a co-founder of that organization, and focusing, as you can imagine, on the marketing side and the business development side, and bringing in, because of our place at AstroAgency, sitting kind of in the middle of the industry around the world, we get to know so many people, we have so many connections. And I think that's one of the reasons why the clients see us, have that kind of USP, because we're not just able to identify target audiences for our clients. We often know personally their target audiences, so we can do, introductions and help them with sales and help them with business development pipelines. So yeah, I think on the Fire Arrow side, because of my network and the work we're doing around the world at AstroAgency, I'm able to really tap into that and leverage that for the Fire Arrow team to then have some discussions around launch capability. So yeah, I know you're very involved in the spaceport side, and I'm really keen to get you together with the Fire Arrow team at some point. I think that would be really cool.
Very good. And do you know that the space report reported last year, the first quarter, that there was a 48% increase in proposed spaceports around the world? It is a hot thing, and just like the dawn of airports, when commercial air aviation started to take off, this is kind of a lot like that. And
Yeah.
where it's just, we're on the cusp of so many different technologies and so many different initiatives that it's just, once it all goes, and tips on that tipping point, oh my goodness, it's going to be incredible.
Yeah.
Some of our US audience may know you more for another initiative that you have during COVID. The Space Bar is one of the things that you started during the lockdowns. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we probably do have a better, there's more brand awareness in Spacebar than most of the things I'm involved in. It's funny how it works out. But when the pandemic set in, we'd only just kind of set up Astro Agency at the time. I realized, this industry, it's so events driven. We go to so many space events, which isn't particularly sustainable. We try to do as many online as possible. But you could do a space event a week. It's really quite crazy at the moment. And when the pandemic and particularly the lockdowns set in, I thought, well, this is going to be a challenge for our industry, because we're so used to going to these events and engaging, whether it's upstream, downstream, whatever the angle is. And I just thought this is going to be a real issue, because we're such a young, the commercial space sector, particularly in Europe, it's so formative that we're going to lose some of that engagement. It's going to be a real downside. Companies being able to find new partners, new contracts, new staff, new team members, right? I was quite concerned about that. So I happened to put a Zoom link through the AstroAgency channels and say, look, if you're around, then join us on Zoom tonight. Bring a coffee, bring a beer, whatever you feel like, and let's have a chat and see how we can help. Let's help each other, essentially. So the first one, there were about 10 people joined, most of the people that I knew, and went on for quite a few hours, I must say, because everyone was so starved of that interaction. But within a few weeks, we had hundreds of people joining, and I think we peaked at around 350 when we had a couple of astronauts dropped into the space bar, and word just really got out, and it was really great. Okay, it wasn't a revenue earner for us or anything like that, but it did get our name out there. But we didn't really promote AstroAgency. We made it. I didn't want it to be like that. I wanted it to be more, come on, let's just hang out and help each other out. But I'm sure there's no doubt it definitely helped us, our brand, in those early days. But yeah, it was a great initiative, still going as well. We do it monthly now, we do it on YouTube with sponsors, and we have a production company. We have fantastic hosts, Dallas Campbell, who's got to be one of the best space and science communicators in the world, with Professor Susie Imber. They're just a fantastic team. So they host it for us now, and we've started to do offline space bars. So we've had events, UK Space Agency events and other events reach out to us and say, would you run a space bar at the end? And I think the beauty of space bar was the idea that it's not like a typical conference where you sit there and you watch the experts talk. It was more, look, this is the subject for tonight. And you can imagine on Zoom having 300 people. Raise your hand if you want to be part of this, and we'll pick 5 people. And it was great because you could have an investor, you could have a new graduate, you could have a space enthusiast, you could have a CEO, you could have a space agency representative, and that mixture was really good. It just gave everybody, you're all in the same in space bar, everybody's on the same level. There's no, okay, this person's got this experience, so we must all listen. There's a place for that, but it wasn't space bar. Space bar was about, let's give everybody an equal voice. And then since then, we thought about stopping it so many times because it takes up so much time to arrange a space bar, and we were trying to get the business going and help the clients out. But every time I'd go to an event, someone would come over and say, oh, you're the space bar guy. I got a job because of you, or we signed an MOU because of someone we met in the space bar during the pandemic, and I just felt it was such a nice feeling, so something we're really proud of. So yeah, we're keen to do more of those. We'd love to take over to the US. We have spoken to a couple of events, so yeah, we'd love to do a space bar live in the US one day. That'd be really cool.
Bring it on. I will be there.
Yes.
I hopefully will be there one day in the UK too, because truly I love the UK. I love living there, and I am keen to get back, at least for a visit. Hold on to your boosters. We will be right back with guest Daniel Smith with AstroAgency after a brief message from our sponsors. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast so you don't miss a thing. What are some marketing challenges that you see within the space industry? So we can break that down as to, in the UK or the world, or just in the company side. So what are some of the challenges you see?
Yeah, I think there are a few, and I guess that's why we started in the first place, because we really recognized that I think with space, it's such an innovative and inspiring sector where there's so many great minds and there's so much focus on the technical development that often the go-to-market strategy and actually, how do we sell this fantastic thing that we're building and we're developing, sometimes that can almost be an afterthought. And so I think that can be a challenge, and especially when it's this commercial space sector is very SME driven, particularly in the UK. There's a lot of small companies, startup companies, and they don't always have the bandwidth, they don't have the resource, they don't have the budgets to be creating marketing campaigns and thinking about that go-to-market, that business development side. They're very much focused on, let's just get whatever we're developing ready for the market. So I think that remains a challenge. I think it's not as simple as there are engineers and there are marketers and there's they stand on opposite sides of the room. It's not to that extent at all. And there are a lot of people who can do both very well. I'm not one of them. I'm very much on the kind of business development marketing side. I'm not a technical person. I don't have a technical background, but I do have a team at AstroAgency of technical experts that I knew we would need to make this work. So yeah, I would say definitely the technical development focus, which is completely understandable too. That can be a challenge because they're not always thinking of how do we market. And I think terminology, I guess that's part of that too. Maybe just not being familiar with how do we tell our story, what is the right messaging to reach our target audience, whether it's space audiences or whether they're working on downstream applications and they want to reach agriculture or maritime or mining or government agencies, whatever it may be. How do they translate that language into messaging that can resonate and can really bring inquiries for their business? So I think that's a challenge. think the perception I talked about earlier too is still an issue outside of the sector too, that I think needs to be changed from marketing agencies and marketing teams within space companies, marketing departments, to think about how do we change that perception of space more to bring that new customers, new investors, whatever it might be, from outside of the sector. Yeah, I think there's a real danger that we talk to ourselves a lot, and I think it's really important that we try to get out of the industry and get the messages out there. But all of these challenges as well, I think that they're also, I mean, they're opportunities, aren't they? They're each an area for people like yourself, people like AstroAgency to support space companies with, and to support CEOs and business development teams to really to overcome these challenges and to help them to sell the brilliant innovation that they're working on.
Marketing takes a lot. And that's one of the things I think that many CEOs and leaders may find surprising, is that
Yes.
there's a lot of wheels. You know, a marketer is very similar in a lot of ways to an engineer. An engineer solves problems. That's what they're trained to do. But that's what a marketer does as well. We solve problems. It's just our tools are different. But it is an art, it is a science, and it is a lot that we need to do on a daily basis.
Absolutely, it's such a great point as well, and I hadn't thought of that. I like that analogy as well with the engineer. Yeah, I think there is sometimes a perception of marketing as being, okay, or almost space companies thinking, right, if I do my LinkedIn post, then I've covered my marketing sort of thing.
Right.
Whereas, it's not until they maybe speak to you where you talk to them about the strategic angle, the importance of, developing a really good proposition that covers your company culture, your USPs, and really using marketing to develop that business development pipeline. There's a lot to that, from SEO and all the technical sides of marketing, and then there's also things like this podcast, getting people onto podcasts. What are the ways that people are consuming content now to make sure that a space company can be heard within the industry or outside the industry? There's so many things, events, getting people on stage at events, space events, but how do we get them on stage at non-space events? Comes back to the point on agriculture, mining, and maritime,
Yes.
and what have you. So there's so much to market. It's great to hear you say that.
It's a lot. It's, even as a professional, sometimes it's a little bit more than I mean, it's a full-time, more than full-time job to do. So one of the things that I want to stress too is that even companies that aren't saying, oh, I need to do a campaign, a lot of the challenges too is that these business owners, these entrepreneurs, they will think, oh, well, I'm just getting a grant, I don't need to worry about marketing. Well, you still do, because there's a lot of how you tell your story to investors.
Yes.
That's a very big part, is that how you present yourself to investors to get that grant is very important, and that's marketing too.
I completely appreciate that. And again, working for other space companies within the industry, I've seen how important investment is, and I've seen how competitive it can be when you're looking for investment. And I think,
Yes.
again, if we're able to show, really sleek presentations, which it shouldn't be important, but we're all human, right? It just is.
Yes.
And if you've been covered in, some of the top publications, some of the top business magazines, and really credible newspapers, that's going to get investors' attention. It just is. It's going to help you stand out. Yeah, I completely agree.
Well, they're taking your temperature. They're saying, how professional are you? And the more professional you are, the more likely you are to succeed. And it is a very big connection. So if you go upstage with, something that's not prepared and doesn't have a good story, you probably will not get it with all the competition that you have around.
For sure, there's a lot of competition, and again, investors will want to see your pipeline. What does that look like? So how do you create a robust pipeline? A lot of that is around getting your message out, so people can find you, so people can reach out to you if they want to sign LOIs or MOUs, or you want to get those initial orders in to impress investors. You need to be making some noise. If not, you can have the best technology in the world, but if nobody knows about it, you'll have to sit by and watch as somebody else, some inferior product, goes out there, and that's a very frustrating feeling. So yeah.
Yeah, if nobody knows you exist, guess what? They can't help you. They can't buy your stuff, and you will cease to exist.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about some of the campaigns that you've been on and the ones that you have found successful and why they were successful.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question because they're so varied. I guess the ones that really stick out for me are where, a lot of what we do is within the space sector. So, it might be, component manufacturers looking for satellite customers or launch vehicle developers looking for satellites, or spaceports looking for launchers. But what really excites me is when we start to take space outside of the sector, which we've talked a little bit about today. So I think that's, yeah, that's where it's those types of campaigns that come to mind initially for me. So I think we're working on something at the moment with the UK Space Agency and Clear Space, and also with Astroscale around the active debris removal, and it's a real passion for me, space sustainability, which I feel is a broad area, and it doesn't just involve in orbit sustainability, but that's one of the sustainability projects we're working on just now. And for that, I think a lot of it was driven by how do we, because Space Agency are funding, it's going to be a very big mission for the UK in the next few years, an active debris removal mission, a real flagship mission. And so part of that, ultimately, the Space Agency is a government agency, it's taxpayers' money that's going to be used for this type of work. So how do we make sure that people can see why this has been selected and why the government feel this is so important? And again, it's back to that perception. And if people are looking at that thing, why are we spending all this money in space? It's important. There are no banks in space, right? The money's being spent here. The technology is being developed on Earth. The jobs are being created on Earth. And so there's a campaign we did with ClearSpace and Astroscale and the UK Space Agency where we went to music festivals and science festivals to try and reach these other audiences and to try and alert them to the importance of this mission on one hand, but also the absolutely terrifying situation of space sustainability. And you've mentioned earlier in the call how many times we all use space data in our everyday lives and how much we rely on satellite information. So if we were to lose all of that, we'd be in real trouble. I mean, it's quite scary when you think about it. So I think the more that we can get that message out there, particularly to young people, it's really important. So we did a big campaign it was called the Blue Dot Festival in the UK, which was a summer festival, and then the New Scientist Live in London. And yeah, it was just great. It was just great to be there, to see those different teams coming together and really engaging with those individuals who hadn't thought of why, didn't even realize that there was a problem with space junk or defunct satellites and what have you, and literally millions of pieces of fragments that are like flying bullets up there, traveling around these assets that are so critical for our everyday lives.
Faster
And
than
so,
bullets.
yeah, exactly
They're
right.
faster than bullets.
And I remember at one of the events we were speaking on stage, and I remember I was in the audience, and I remember there was a mention of how many times the space station has had to move to avoid debris, and there was a literal gasp from the audience. This they could clearly see in their minds this idea that what if debris was to strike the space station. So as much as it's about the assets up there, it's also about human lives. And as more space stations develop in the future, who knows, right? There's going to be more and more things that are under threat. So yeah, I'm very passionate about the sustainability side. So it really ticked all the boxes for me, that campaign, because we were getting out there, and it got a lot of really good coverage. And at Clear Space, where they went on to win. They've recently been in Forbes magazine, top 100, technology inventions, and a lot of BBC interest. And it's just great to see that marketing campaign, because it was quite, I wouldn't say new to us, but different for us to say, right, we're not after the space audience this time. We're telling the space stories to non-space audiences, to governments, to young people, and to everyday people in all walks of life. And so, yeah, it was really exciting to work on something so different, and then to see the effect that it's had. That's probably been, well, it's one of my favorite campaigns. We do a lot with Spire as well, the satellite manufacturer, again, on trying to reach insurance and trying to reach utilities and trying to reach, all these other industries too. And I really enjoy those campaigns as well, because you're really trying to transform that technical language and those incredible capabilities that Spire have into something that will just, as I say, resonate with those other audiences. So those are the campaigns, yeah, that really excite me.
One of the things that UK is fast being known for is, like you just said, space sustainability, but also not just up there, but down here. Where the spaceports that are being built, they're not being built traditionally. They're being built with sustainability in mind. in zero carbon and alternative fuels. And how important is this narrative for the space industry? And you recently were at COPD 28 in Dubai. If you want to tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more about that.
A real honor to be invited over to COP with, to be in the blue zone with all the business leaders, presidents, and world leaders talking about the importance of net zero and the drive towards net zero. So to be able to, I was there and I was talking on stage with Scotland's First Minister and also with Anushi Ansari, the X Prize the astronaut, and a number of other individuals. So it was a great moment, and it was just great to be part of that voice for the space sector at such a high profile event focused on net zero. So to answer your question, I would say it's the biggest challenge we've got. It's the biggest challenge, 100%. There's nothing more important for the space industry. I think the more we look at it holistically, not just as an orbit, but also, you're absolutely right. We need to protect Earth's environment, because what's more important than that? So the more that we can do, ultimately, launch is the enabler for getting all that important information from satellites to support our environment. But if you can also drive down the environmental impact of launch, whether that's through the supply chain, whether that's the amount of people driving to watch launches, whether it's sustainable fuels, something I was involved with back in my Skyrora days, spaceport development, which I'm involved with on the Fire Arrow side, the more you can drive all that, the environmental impact down on that, plus that's enabling the information to come back from Earth to Earth that can help. That's going to help the space sector to contribute to net zero. And if anybody had ever said to you, 10 years ago, oh, could the space zero be working towards net zero and contributing to net zero goals, most people would say, oh, I've seen a launch, there's nothing sustainable about that, right? So I think it's again changing the perception, because there's so much great work being done, and the UK is really, it's great to hear you say that, and that's being recognised, because UK really is trying to position itself as leading by example and a thought leader. We're quite fortunate on the launch side, because we're developing from nothing, from scratch. So there's an opportunity to build sustainability into the way that we develop our spaceport, the way that we develop our launch sector, and really look at that design for demise when it comes to satellites as well and deorbiting. So yeah, I don't think there's a more important part for the sector, because the more that we damage the environment through space activity, the less likely people are going to get behind space. And talking of in orbit, all it's going to take, and we know that satellites have already been struck by debris, space stations having to move. It only takes a huge catastrophic collision for us to lose so much that we rely on, and it could be a huge, issue for the industry. It could destroy the industry. Let's face it. We look at things like Kessler syndrome in the future. So yeah, I just don't think that there's a bigger challenge, but there's also no bigger opportunity for me too. So those fuels that are being created, and the sustainable launch technologies that we're seeing around the world, and the propositions by spaceports to be net zero, that's all going to attract commercial activity as well. So there's a real business opportunity here for people if we can become more sustainable. So there's so many wins to this that I think it's really important to focus on. And as I say, I'm delighted always that I've spoken South Korea space event recently, UN events about sustainability. AstroAgency created the world's first space sustainability roadmap for a country. So we wrote that for the Scottish Government, and together with our partners in the sector. And it was just great to engage with space companies. And nobody says, oh, this sounds expensive, we're not getting behind this. And we had some tough things in there. We were saying, if you can't prove that you're moving towards sustainability in the next few years, then you shouldn't have a right to access government funds. And nobody says, no, we can't do this. Everybody was behind it that we engaged with. And we're a close network. It was over 150 space companies in Scotland, but we are a very close network, and everybody just wants to do it the right way, I think, because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's a commercial opportunity for the UK to be seen as the greenest place in space to launch from, and greenest spaceports in the world. So yes, it's great to see the interest, and I think the more we can all shout about it, not just marketeers, but I think the people in space companies, we all need to be looking at ourselves and our supply chains and saying, how do we become more sustainable to support this industry? And I really like to see, Morba Jan, Max Alexander, and Ray Fielding, all the people who are out there talking about the importance of this Secure World Foundation, Crystal and the team there. These guys really inspire me to try and do more of that and to talk more about this problem, because it's a problem for everybody, not just the sector.
Yeah, we live in a bubble. It's called the world, and we've got to take care of it. And that's one of the things about space, is that it's full of very creative minds that can solve these problems. And that is why we have so much space technology coming back down. It's not about what's going on up there. All that technology, all that activity benefits life here. And so all of the space initiatives, like when you're talking alternative fuel, that is not just going to stay in space. That's going to make its way into agriculture and other types of polluting
Yeah.
endeavors, and
Yes.
there are going to be new fuels that have net zero. So everybody wins when we go this direction. So it's fabulous. It is fabulous, and most of the people that I have met in space care about that thing. They don't want to pollute the environment. They want to protect this beautiful place that we live. And that's why a lot of people go into the space industry, is because of that. It's not for other reasons. It's quite a dynamic pool of people.
For sure.
Let's talk about those people and how it takes all kinds of different disciplines, which most people just think about the engineers. So let's talk about how to attract new talent into the space industry, not just, ping pong back and forth with the talent that we already have. How do we get that new talent?
Yeah, again, it's like the sustainability side. I think every space company has a responsibility to be talking about the sector and changing the perceptions of people who are looking for careers, whether it's very early on graduates from university, college, etc., or whether it's people that are in other sectors and they're trying to decide what they transition into. Whether the problem is that and this is more maybe a European issue or UK issue, getting the word out that space is a genuine career opportunity can be quite difficult. If you speak to people, outside of the industry, then you'll be surprised how many people aren't aware of the activity going on in the UK and that you've talked about today. So whether it's just about raising awareness in the sector generally, or whether it's about going out and talking about how space is actually a secure job, I think again people might look at space and maybe they grew up wanting to be in the space sector and fascinated by space flight, space technology, and astronauts and what have you. And maybe it's a dream job, but they think, oh, but it doesn't look very stable. So I think it's really important to showcase the companies that absolutely buck that trend and change their minds and say, actually, it's stable. We've got a thriving commercial space sector. There are companies, decades old now in the UK. So yeah, just trying to change that to get more people involved. But it's everyone's responsibility to talk about it. And on the AstroAgency side, it's been interesting because it's very important to us to have technical minds in the team to merge and blend with the creative minds in the team. And ultimately, space is there's a lot of complex, technology that's there, and often people like myself just don't have the ability to understand it all. So it's critical that we have our technical team and we bring in these engineers and these scientists and the doctors of astrophysics and all sorts of people that I've been lucky enough to hire in our team. But we also need these people from the creative minds and the business developers and people from other mindsets to come in and work together. And I think that's, from a marketing perspective, it's important, but of course it's a problem for the whole industry. We need space lawyers, we need marketeers, we need insurers, recruitment agencies. There's lots of skills that are needed to make this industry even more mature.
In fact, I just talked to a HVAC, which is a air conditioning company, and the one gentleman was like, "Oh, I always wanted to be in space." I'm like, "We need you."
I did a talk recently called Space Needs You. That's exactly what I did it on, and it was targeted at other industries, trying to pull them in. That's a great point.
Yeah, they just don't. And I know when I first got interested in space when I was 13, I came back from Kennedy Space Center and I was all excited. And I wanted to be into a career that would be selected for colonization of another planet, which sounds pretty far fetched for a 13-year-old. And I got looked at like I had three eyeballs, is like, that doesn't happen. So, that perception really knocked me back a little bit. And I didn't go back into space until the last 5 years. It's only been. So
Yeah.
when I went back to Kennedy Space Center, which is why it's vitally important to have those kind of facilities for inspiration, which is what one of the jobs spaceports do. And that's why I'm kind of passionate about it. But
Yes.
so I have a note in our discussion to also mention Daria being given a prestigious award. So if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting thing from the AstroAgency side, because we don't so much see ourselves as a marketing agency that specializes in space. We see ourselves as a space company that promotes the messages for the sector. And I think a great example of that recently happened where our CEO, my business partner Dasha, won a Sir Arthur Clarke Award in Liverpool from the British Interplanetary Society, which was celebrating its 90th anniversary, the oldest space organization in the world. And when you look at the recipient list of that award before Dasha, there were astronauts and Sir Patrick Moore and all these incredible people, that, engineers and scientists. So for someone who leads a marketing agency, for Dasha to win that, I think it was great to see that again. What we've just talked about, the importance of the sector recognizing minds that aren't just the technical minds, but the other people that can support the sector in various ways and provide that guidance to the industry. So yeah, it was great. And on an Astro level, of course, it was fantastic for us. The team were just so happy because it was a case of, wow, we're really seen as a space company, not so much a marketing company, which was always our plan. And a lot of us are from the space sector. As I've mentioned, it's not just myself that set up space companies, not just myself that worked in the industry. We've got people that worked in the industry for decades on our team. So we all, it's important to us to feel like we're changing it from the inside. It's a really great feeling that. So yeah, that and we've won a few marketing awards, but to win a space award like that was really great. And Dash is from Ukraine, as a few of our team members are, indeed my wife as well. So it's been a tough time, as you can imagine. So again, it was a real highlight in what's been a difficult couple of years on a personal level outside of the business. So yeah.
And I would like to touch on that real quick because I think this message needs to get out there, is that the Ukraine has been a horrible thing. And Russia, when it first attacked the Ukraine, the very first thing it did was take out the satellites.
Yeah, yeah, interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, um, on the sustainability point. It's crazy to think that these ASAT tests happen and that the countries will shoot their own satellites, but it does feel like an act of war the more, because you mentioned the faster than bullets. So if you're shooting your own satellite, but if you're creating this debris cloud that's moving that fast and that's in the region of low Earth orbit where there's so many important assets of multiple countries, more and more. Greece just announced a constellation yesterday that they're going to put up there. So many countries and so many assets, important assets that are used for so many crucial things. That to me feels like an act of war. And it's funny you mentioned that, because a few months later, then the full scale invasion happened. So I do also see that as part of the same, yeah, the same war. Yeah, interesting.
That's a war that is it doesn't matter where you live in the world, it can happen. It, and there are some definite saber rattlings with China as well as with Russia. So they see that as a front and a tactic to take a country out. And so that leaves us very vulnerable. So space is important in so many different respects. So
Yeah, and I think the way that space, particularly imagery, has been used from satellites, I think that's something that has broken through the space barrier. I think a lot of people reading, the newspapers and updates and websites on the war and seeing, particularly when before the invasion happened, in the weeks and months before the invasion, where the troops were on the border, but you could see all of that through satellite data. That was an interesting way. It was great that people could see the benefits of space and the importance, not just that we've talked about the environmental importance, but the defense importance that
yes.
space brings as well to support us defending ourselves in these situations. So yeah, space it feels like it feels it's been more a part of that war, but maybe because technology is so advanced now, it feels like it's played a big role in that war.
Well, and it's a very big lesson to learn because your life can be one way one day, and then the next day it can be completely changed. And
Absolutely. Yeah, and from Dasha's point of view, she was suddenly grabbing her dog and her son and her mum, getting in a car and driving from Ukraine to Scotland, which is through several countries. leaving her husband behind, but she didn't miss a single call with any of our clients. And she was so determined to keep supporting the sector and support our clients. But we were shocked to see her joining the calls. But for her, and she said it in her when she acceptance speech when she won the award, she said for her, it gave her that normality, it gave her that one constant in her life. Work was the normal thing that she had to grab onto. So she was not going to miss a single meeting because she needed that. She needed that constant. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It just turns everybody that it's financial, it's where you live, it's your home, it's everything is turned upside down. And the people you know and the people you love are going through the same situations. And we know lots. Again, my wife's from Ukraine. My daughter. I was actually in Ukraine a month before the invasion happened, and my wife was heavily pregnant. So yeah, it's the people it's the family members, and that's all plays on your mind. So even if you're safe, you're still worrying about other people. So very difficult, yeah, and it's a scary situation.
Well, and it was felt around the world. It wasn't just, the most horrific thing was what happened to the people of Ukraine, but the supply chain issues that
Sure.
went all around the world, and all of a sudden we realized how much steel we were getting from Russia, and all the things that we did not realize we were getting from that area of the world. All of a sudden, that was a problem.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So it was felt around the world, just not in ways that were as dramatic. So and I hope that it's over soon. So
Yes, absolutely.
okay, so on a positive note, let's go where we see the space industry in the next 10 to 20 years. And I know space is a long game, but there are so many changes I believe are getting ready to happen in the next 10 years. By 2030, by 2035, we're going to be looking at a completely different landscape of things. So,
Yeah.
what's your vision on what the space industry is going to do in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, it seems like it's all moving so fast. I mean, I've been in the industry now since, as I say, 2016 or so, and it's changed so dramatically, particularly the new space, the commercial space sector. It's all moving so fast. And yeah, I'd like to think there'll be a lot more technology transfer happening from the sector outside of the sector, but also a lot more uh, people and technology transitioning into the sector too to support the growth of the industry. Um, I hope that we see a lot more kind of other industries that understand and appreciate the opportunities from the actionable insights that come from satellite data and how that can support their businesses and really improve their profit margins ultimately at the end of the day. And actually, again, looking at some of the companies we work with, it's not as expensive as you would think to access space data or even to put your own satellites into orbit. So I think, yeah, we'll see a lot more appreciation of this sector. I think we can talk about the marketing problems a lot, but I don't know what you think. I definitely feel that something's changing, that there is more, that space is getting out there more than it was, perhaps. I mean, commercial space rather than astronauts and kind of deep space missions, which have always had good coverage and they're so inspirational. But that commercial element of space and the opportunities, the benefits to Earth from space, I think it's improving. I'd like to see it improve more. But ultimately, I think it comes down to, and I'm repeating myself maybe again because sustainability is such an important area for me, but the timelines you're mentioning, they're not too far away from when, there's so many countries are looking at net zero and reaching net zero by. So I do
Yes.
feel that the sector needs to improve that area and it needs to become a lot more sustainable. And it's not just about in orbit, as you say, and it's not just about highlighting the ways that satellite data can support the environment. It is about that on the ground sustainability right through to the supply chains. Even looking at, what is the environmental effect of crunching all the data that comes down from satellites as well? That's going to have a big footprint too. So there's so many broader areas that you can look at, and I think there's a company that we work with that are changed the way that they package up their components and send them out to clients. So it's interesting to see the space sector even looking at packaging and how we can have more sustainable packaging. So the more that we can tick all these boxes, from the sustainable fuels, the spaceport, but even the way that we transport the technology, the components, the subsystems that we're building in the industry, I think it's really key. So yeah, for me, I'd like to see, I really hope we'll see a far more sustainable sector and one that we can really be proud of and we can shout about. We did a lot of work with Friends of the Earth in the UK and in Scotland, And it was great to work with an environmental charity. And at first it was difficult, as you can imagine, especially with my launch background. I had some interesting questions and challenges there, but they really appreciated that we genuinely wanted to do something. And when we wrote the sustainability roadmap for Space Scotland and for, for the sector here and for the wider UK sector, there was definitely that appreciation that, okay, you're trying to make a difference. And they drew parallels, funnily enough, to the whisky sector, which is also a big sector in Scotland. But the whisky sector, a decade ago was seen as quite a polluter as well, the rivers and what have you. But there's been huge change in that industry, and a lot more renewable energy use, and so many processes that are far more sustainable in the way that the whiskey and wider spirits are made in the UK. And Friends of the Earth told us, said, look to the whiskey sector and you'll see some great transferable lessons that can be learned, that space industry can learn. So I think it's important to learn from other industries wherever we can. But yeah, driving down the environmental impact of space over the next 10 years, I feel like that's got to be a huge area of focus.
I completely agree. So keep this world blue. Let's not do anything different to it, because the climate is in a little bit more of a crisis than we talk about. So that's, I think, something that needs to be talked about more. So, okay, so I always end with this particular question, because, what thoughts do you want our audience to leave with today? What do you want them to go around mulling around in their heads as they're going, never thought of it that way? So what are those thoughts?
I would say, what is it that you can do today, tomorrow, this week to showcase the benefits that space can have on Earth to people that didn't know, because it's a nice feeling when you tell somebody all the ways that we access satellite data every day, and you see their response of, oh, I never thought about that. And, the more that we can get that message out, and we've talked a lot about it today, the better. So I would say that would be it. How can we all, particularly marketeers, like a lot of your audience will be people in the marketing who are passionate about space and marketing. Well, let's use those two incredible industries, incredibly exciting professions to be part of, to get that message out to anybody that we can, and just try and inform people of how important space technology is, not so much for space, but for us on Earth.
Absolutely. And I love the term marketeer. I never thought of that term. So I love that. I just do. So, well, thank you so much for spending your morning or afternoon with us. So it has been a pleasure, and I can't wait to meet you in person, and
Yes.
and support the initiatives that you're doing. So
I
kudos.
almost made it to the spaceport event in Florida, and we'll be over in the US this year. So I'll keep you posted. It'd be great to see you, and do let us know if you're over in the UK or anywhere in Europe. Yeah, it'd be great to meet up finally in person.
But I do plan on coming over that way. So, and this was, speaking of the spaceport event, it was the biggest one we've ever had. So next year will even be bigger. So you definitely don't want to miss that. So
Count us in, yeah, definitely.
a special thanks to Daniel Smith with AstroAgency for sharing his journey to space. Be sure to check out his links listed in today's show notes. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast so you can get the word out about this incredible industry of space. I hope that you have found this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for the stars.